Let me try it once. Dean Martin said it quietly, calmly, like he was asking to borrow a pen. Vincent Moretti, the legendary vocal coach, smirked. "Mr. Martin, one take won't be sufficient for a piece this complex." Dean stepped to the microphone. One take. What happened in the next 3 minutes would humble a man who'd spent 50 years training the greatest singers in the world. It was 1963, Capitol Records Studio in Hollywood. Dean was recording a new album. The song was Midnight Sun, a jazz standard, notoriously difficult, 4-octave range, impossible melodic intervals. Most singers wouldn't even attempt it. The producers had brought in Vincent Moretti, 65 years old, Italian opera-trained, had coached Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Tony Bennett. If there was a legendary voice in American music, Moretti had probably worked with them. Moretti had listened to the arrangement, shook his head. "Nobody can sing this sober," he'd told the producers. "This piece requires a vocal looseness that only alcohol provides. The inhibitions must be lowered. Fortunately, Dean Martin's drunk persona is actually perfect for this song." Dean had arrived at the studio, overheard the comment. He was completely sober. He was always completely sober. The drunk act was performance, comedy, character work. But Moretti didn't know that. Moretti had approached Dean with a condescending smile. "Mr. Martin, this piece is quite challenging. Perhaps we should schedule the session after you've had a few drinks to loosen the vocal cords, get into character." That's when Dean had said it. "Let me try it once." Now he was at the microphone. The track started playing. And Dean Martin sang Midnight Sun perfectly on the first take. Every note across the 4-octave range, every impossible interval. The control was absolute. The emotion was perfect. The phrasing was impeccable. The entire studio went silent. Engineers stopped moving. Producers stood frozen. Moretti's face went white. Dean removed his headphones, looked at Moretti. "Sober enough?" Then he walked out of the studio. This is the story of how Dean Martin proved a legendary vocal coach completely wrong, and what that moment meant. Vincent Moretti had been born in Naples, Italy in 1908. His family immigrated to New York when he was 8 years old. His father was an opera singer. His mother had studied classical voice at the Naples Conservatory under some of the most demanding instructors in Europe. Music wasn't just in Moretti's blood, it was his entire life. He'd grown up surrounded by it, fell asleep every night listening to his father practice, watched his mother teach private students in their small apartment. By age 15, he was studying vocal technique formally under the same instructors who'd trained his mother. By 20, he was teaching his own students. By 25, he'd developed a reputation as someone who could fix vocal problems other coaches couldn't solve. His specialty was understanding the technical mechanics of singing at a level most coaches never reached. Breath control, resonance, pitch accuracy, vibrato. He could listen to a voice and identify exactly what was working and what wasn't. More importantly, he knew how to fix it. In the 1920s and 30s, he'd worked primarily with opera singers, big voices, powerful voices, voices that required immense technical skill and years of training. He'd helped tenors expand their range, helped sopranos develop better breath support, fixed damaged voices that other coaches had given up on. But as popular music evolved in the 1940s and into the 1950s, Moretti evolved with it. He started working with jazz singers, crooners, the new generation of American vocalists who were defining a different kind of singing, one that required less volume but more nuance. Frank Sinatra had come to him in 1947, wanted help with breath control for long phrases. Moretti had worked with him for 6 months, taught him techniques that became part of Frank's signature sound. Bing Crosby had consulted with him about maintaining vocal health while recording and performing constantly. Tony Bennett had studied with him to develop better pitch accuracy on difficult intervals. By the 1950s and into the early 1960s, Moretti was the most sought-after vocal coach in the business, not just for pop singers. Jazz vocalists like Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan worked with him. Even younger performers like Nat Cole had come to him for guidance. If you were a serious vocalist, you studied with Moretti, or you wanted to.
He understood voices, understood what was possible and what wasn't, understood the technical requirements for different styles of singing. That's why when he looked at the arrangement for Midnight Sun, he knew immediately it would be nearly impossible to sing sober. The song had been written by Lionel Hampton and Sonny Burke in 1947, with lyrics added later by Johnny Mercer. Beautiful melody, haunting lyrics about lost love and memory, but technically demanding in ways most popular songs weren't. It spanned 4 full octaves, from low bass notes to high tenor range, required the singer to move seamlessly from deep chest voice to high head voice and back again multiple times without any breaks or pauses to reset. The melodic intervals were unusual for popular music, jumps of sevenths and ninths that most singers would struggle to hit accurately. These weren't the comfortable intervals of typical pop songs. These were jazz intervals, unpredictable, challenging. The phrasing required exceptional breath control. Some phrases were long, 10, 12 seconds without a breath, while maintaining perfect pitch and emotional delivery. Most singers would run out of air or lose the pitch by the end. More than that, the song required emotional vulnerability, a looseness, and abandon. It wasn't enough to hit the notes technically. The singer had to make it feel effortless, natural, like they were simply expressing emotion rather than navigating a technical obstacle course. That's why so few singers attempted it, and why the ones who did usually needed some kind of inhibition-lowering substance to pull it off. Moretti had worked with several singers who'd tried Midnight Sun over the years. The ones who succeeded, or got close, were usually the ones who'd had a few drinks first. The alcohol loosened the voice, made the difficult intervals feel more natural, allowed the emotion to flow without the singer overthinking the technical challenges. He'd seen what happened when singers tried it completely sober. They focused too much on the technique, on hitting the intervals correctly, on managing their breath. The performance became mechanical, lost the emotional core that made the song work. That's why when the producers told him Dean Martin was going to record it, Moretti had actually felt relieved. Dean's drunk persona was famous. The slightly slurred speech, the tipsy energy on stage, the jokes about drinking. America loved it. Moretti assumed it was real, assumed Dean actually drank, a lot, which would be perfect for Midnight Sun. He'd told the producers exactly that. Dean's drunk act is actually ideal for this song. Once he's had a few drinks, he should be able to handle it. What Moretti didn't know, what most people outside the entertainment industry didn't know, was that Dean's drunk act was exactly that, an act, performance, character work. Dean Martin rarely drank, almost never drank while performing. The persona was carefully crafted comedy, a character he played so convincingly that even professionals like Moretti believed it was real. When Dean arrived at the studio that day, he'd overheard Moretti's comment, heard the vocal coach explain to the producers that the song required alcohol, that Dean's drinking would be an advantage. Dean hadn't said anything, just listened, registered what was being assumed about him. Then Moretti had approached him, professional, condescending in the way experts often are with performers they view as less serious. "Mr. Martin, this piece is quite challenging. Perhaps we should schedule the recording session for after you've had a few drinks, to loosen the vocal cords, get into the proper state for the song." Dean had looked at the sheet music, at the arrangement, at Moretti. "Let me try it once," he'd said. Moretti had smiled, the indulgent smile of an expert dealing with an amateur who doesn't understand the complexity of what's being asked. "Mr. Martin, one take won't be sufficient for a piece this complex. This isn't like your usual material. This requires—" "One take," Dean had interrupted. "Calm, quiet, final." Then he'd stepped to the microphone.
The studio musicians started the track. The arrangements swelled, beautiful, haunting, technically demanding, and Dean began to sing. The first notes were deep, chest voice, rich, controlled, perfect pitch. Then the melody climbed, rose through the octaves. Dean's voice followed effortlessly, no strain, no reaching, just pure, controlled technique. The impossible intervals that Moretti had worried about, Dean hit them perfectly. Each jump in pitch was precise, musical, intentional. The emotion in Dean's voice was exactly what the song required. Vulnerable, open, honest. Not the looseness of alcohol, the precision of a true professional who understood exactly what he was doing. By the second verse, the engineers had stopped moving, just stood there, listening. The producers were frozen, stunned. Moretti felt his face go hot, then cold. His 50 years of expertise, his understanding of what was possible. Dean was making it all irrelevant. The song built to its emotional climax. Dean's voice soared into the high register, held notes that should have been impossible, made it sound easy. Then brought it back down, gentle, intimate. The final phrases sung with such control and emotion that it felt like Dean was singing directly to each person in the room. The track ended. Dean held the final note, perfect pitch, perfect length. Then silence. The entire studio was quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Dean removed his headphones, looked at Moretti. Sober enough? Then he walked out of the studio. Moretti stood there, mouth open, unable to speak. One of the sound engineers finally broke the silence. Should we do another take? Moretti shook his head slowly, still staring at the microphone where Dean had been standing. Another take? His voice was barely a whisper. That was perfect. He couldn't finish the sentence. I've been training vocalists for 50 years. I've worked with Sinatra, with Crosby, with the greatest voices in American music. I've never heard anyone sing Midnight Sun like that, and I've certainly never heard it sung sober. One of the producers spoke up. Vincent, are you saying? I'm saying I was completely wrong about Dean, about what this song required, about everything. The recording was released on Dean's album later that year. Midnight Sun became one of the biggest hits on the record. Radio stations played it constantly. Listeners called in requesting it. Other vocalists heard it, professional singers, jazz musicians, people who understood exactly how difficult that song was. And they tried to cover it, tried to match what Dean had done. None of them came close. Some had the technical ability, could hit most of the notes, navigate most of the intervals, but they couldn't make it sound as effortless as Dean had, couldn't capture the emotional vulnerability combined with perfect technical control.
A few singers who'd had successful careers told Moretti privately that they'd attempted Midnight Sun and given up. It was too difficult, required too much simultaneously. And yet, Dean had done it in one take, stone-cold sober, with no preparation, no warm-up, just stepped to the microphone and sang it perfectly. The recording became a benchmark, a standard that other singers measured themselves against. Vocal coaches used it in teaching. Listen to how Dean handles the interval between the bridge and the final verse. That's what control sounds like. Music critics who dismissed Dean as a lightweight entertainer, just a comedian who sang, had to reassess. You couldn't listen to that recording and think Dean wasn't a serious vocalist. The technique was too sophisticated, the artistry too refined. Because Dean hadn't needed alcohol to sing the impossible song. He'd needed what he always had, absolute professionalism, natural talent developed over years of practice, the experience that came from decades of performing, and the discipline to make the extraordinarily difficult look easy.
Vincent Moretti never forgot that day, never forgot being so completely wrong about a performer, about what was required for great singing. He continued coaching vocalists for another 20 years, but he never again assumed he knew what a singer needed, never again suggested alcohol as a solution to a technical challenge. In 1985, 22 years after that recording session, Moretti was interviewed for a documentary about the greatest vocalists of the 20th century. The interviewer asked him about working with legends, about coaching Sinatra and Crosby and Bennett, then asked, "What's the finest vocal performance you've ever witnessed?" Moretti didn't hesitate. Dean Martin, Midnight Sun, 1963. One take. The interviewer looked surprised. Dean Martin? But he wasn't known for technical. That's exactly the problem, Moretti interrupted. People assumed, because of his drunk act, because of his comedy, they assumed he wasn't a serious vocalist. I assumed that. Moretti leaned forward. I told Dean nobody could sing Midnight Sun sober. I genuinely believed his drunk act was real, that he needed alcohol to perform at that level. He proved me wrong in one take, sang that impossibly difficult song more perfectly than I'd ever heard it sung, stone cold sober, with more technical control and emotional depth than I thought possible. Dean taught me the most important lesson of my 50-year career. The greatest singers are greatest when they're professionals, not when they're drunk. When they have real talent, real discipline, real understanding of their craft. Moretti's voice got quiet. I was wrong about Dean, about his talent, about what makes great singing. That one take was the finest vocal performance I've ever witnessed in my life, and I'd spent decades thinking I understood voices. The interviewer asked what Dean had said after. Moretti smiled sadly. He took off his headphones, looked at me and said, "Sober enough?" then walked out. I stood there, unable to speak, completely humbled. That's Dean Martin. Made the impossible look easy, made the expert look foolish, and did it with such quiet class that he didn't even need to explain, just let the performance speak for itself. In 1963, a legendary vocal coach told Dean Martin nobody could sing Midnight Sun sober. Dean sang it perfectly in one take, asked, "Sober enough?" and walked out. The coach spent the next 22 years telling people it was the finest vocal performance he'd ever witnessed, because Dean didn't need alcohol. He needed talent, professionalism, control, the things the drunk act made people think he didn't have.